Okay, so welcome to our A Chat with Third Culture Kids webinar. Um, I'm Jessica. I'm the owner of the Querétaro Culture Corner and Consulting here in Querétaro, Mexico, and my goal is to help newcomers to Mexico survive and thrive in their new life here in Mexico. So I'm joined today by Jess and Matt, and these two have grown up as third culture kids. And our working definition of third culture kids today is going to be a third culture kid, or TCK, is a person who has spent a significant part of his or her developmental years outside of their parents' culture or cultures. Although elements from each culture are assimilated into the TCK's life experience, the sense of belonging is in relationship to others of similar background. So a lot of kids who grow up in multiple cultures or a different culture from the one they were born in, they may relate not necessarily to the culture their parents are from or even to the culture that they live in, but to other kids who have a similar growing up in different cultures. And that can definitely vary, as I'm sure we'll see today, by individual. Some people will feel more at home in their host culture. Some people will feel more at home in their passport country culture, and some people feel more at home with other third culture kids. And I want to share a little, there's a writing that a third culture kid wrote here, and it says, it's about her experience. She says, I grew up in a yellow country, but my parents are blue. I'm blue, or at least that's what they told me. But I play with the yellows. I went to school with the yellows. I spoke the yellow language. I even dressed and appeared to be yellow. Then I moved to the blue land. Now I go to school with the blues. I speak the blue language. I even dress and look blue. But deep down inside me, something's yellow. I love the blue country, but my ways are tinted with yellow. When I'm in the blue land, I want to be yellow. When I'm in the yellow land, I want to be blue. Why can't I be both? A place where I can be me, a place where I can just be green. I just want to be green. And those of you who've grown up as third culture kids, or those of you who are raising third culture kids, probably either have run across this feeling or will run across this feeling yourself or with your kids in the future, that I don't really fit. And I think everyone here has some relation to Mexico. So like I don't fit in the US or Canada where I'm from, but I also don't fit in Mexico. And that can be a really hard thing to manage. And so today, we're going to talk with Jess and Matt. We had a third person that was going to come, and his flight was changed from last night to this morning. So he's not going to be able to join us, unfortunately. But we have Matt, who, do you want to explain just a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you grew up, where you live now for us?
Sure thing. About a minute or
Yeah,
whatever you.
that's fine.
So yeah, I was born in South Carolina, but I was a baby when my parents decided to move to Spain. My parents were missionaries in Madrid, and so I grew up. Um, my first birthday was in Madrid, and I was there till I was 19. So I went to Spanish schools, public schools, kindergarten, pre-K, all that. My senior year in Madrid, I went to a missionary kids school in English. That was my first time studying in English. Yeah, because I had in mind to go to the US for college. So that's where I went to school. I now live in Mexico, married to a Mexican. And I don't know, that's it for now.
Okay. Thanks. And Jess, where did you grow up? Where have you lived?
I was born in, well, I guess I'll start with my parents, like Matt mentioned. My parents were also missionaries. They had my two older sisters born in the US, even though they were living in Mexico at the time. And for some reason, I was the one born in Mexico. So I was born there. I was born in Jalisco. We lived in Jalisco in that state. We also lived in the state of Guanajuato growing up and in Querétaro. So in a few different, we moved around a bit. And then at the age of 15, my parents decided to move back to the US. So that's when I got to go to public school in the US, very different than public school in Mexico. So that's where I actually met my husband. We ended up getting married, and now we're currently homeless. We're kind of moving around. I guess you could we're kind of, I guess, would be in the digital nomad type of fit into that group right now.
Okay, thanks. So before we began recording, I had asked you both if your first language was English or Spanish, and if I'm not mistaken, the answer for both of you was both. Is that correct? Yeah,
Yes.
you grew up speaking both languages at the same time. So I know that for a lot of our participants, your kids or yourself are learning another language right now, and that's going to be a challenge too, because like Jess and Matt were able to go to school in Spanish with no problem, and then they were able to go to school in English. Jess, did you have issues going to school in English when you were, I guess, in high school when you went to the US?
It wasn't as bad as it could have been. I didn't really know how to read or write in English. I could read it, you read it in Spanish. So I would read everything in Spanish and guess what it was because I already knew the language. And fortunately for me, actually, the school system was just so bad that so many students were in the same, like I did not stand out that much compared to the
Wow.
other kids, but I would go to the ESL classroom, even though I was not in that group of kids. I wasn't, my parents didn't put me in a special class or anything. They just put me into all the regular classes. So that was a bit of a struggle trying to learn all of that quickly. Thankfully, though, I'm good at memorizing, so I was able to memorize a lot of words and stuff. So the reading and all that, I caught up fairly quickly.
Oh, good. And Matt, you said you went to school in Spanish until your senior year in high school. How was that transition and then transitioning to college in the US? How was that language-wise for you?
As I'm thinking about this, we didn't have well, so I had no formal studying in English until my senior year in high school, but there was another missionary, I guess one of my tias, that they become, but she would spend time, I think it was during elementary years. She had two boys the same age as me and my brothers, and she would spend time teaching us English grammar, like very, very basic stuff, but it was just helpful to have some awareness. Um, and then because it was a private missionary kid school, there was a lot of hand holding. I think I mean, it was not like very, and it was a small class. I think there was seven of us, so it was just kind of easy in that sense to. I had never written a paper, it's like now you need to have your references and everything. I was like that. So the concept was like, what's this? Okay, wow, and so that was more different for me than the actual language. But yeah, just one of the styles of yeah, presenting your work. So I had to learn that just for that senior year. But then it carried, of course, into college as well.
Yeah, so you had that base of from your senior year in high school that would have been similar to your college experience as far as
Yeah,
like writing papers and things.
totally, totally. Yeah.
Okay. And what was your experience like making friends when you moved to a new country, which for Jessica, well, you moved around in Mexico quite a bit, and then to the US, and then for Matt, I guess it would be moving to the US for college. Can you tell us a little bit about how your experience in making friends with basically monocultural people your own age was?
I didn't have an issue, to be honest. I was very shy around adults, but with kids, I was a goof. So I was the worst student to any teacher probably because I wouldn't stop talking. I would talk to anyone and everyone. I even got sat next to the teacher as a punishment. I would talk to the teacher. I mean, it was just not wasn't my problem.
Okay.
I'm also lean more extrovert, so I don't know a stranger. I mean, I can engage with anybody. So in general, I think I knew I had an awareness that, like I'm in the blue and yellow part. Like I'm not a yellow, I'm a blue, but I'm fitting in with the yellows. And so, yeah, there was not, you know how kids are, they know they can bully you if they can use the fact that you're not in my case, you're not a Spaniard, there they would say Yankee, hey Yankee, Yankee. Like in Mexico it's gringo, but in Spain it was Yankee. And so that was, if they didn't know what else to do, they would pull that card, and try to insult me that way. But yeah, it didn't really, it wasn't, I don't think it was that traumatizing. We had a pretty secure home environment, and yeah, so in general, I had a lot of friends throughout my life. Now, even in college, same thing. Went to a private Christian college. People are more curious than they are, like judgmental. And so it's like, yeah, I'll tell you all you want about Spain. It's great. So, but yeah, I found myself. Well, I don't know if we'll get into this later, but I mean, not just being like, I don't know a ton about U.S. culture because I just didn't grow up here, and so that was just a
Yeah.
whole new adjustment. Like this time of the year, first freshman year, Mark. All right, fill in your brackets. I'm like, brackets. What's the brackets? The basketball March Madness. Come on, you should know. Yeah, no clue. So
Yeah.
little things like that, you gotta just pick up and learn. So
Okay. So,
something.
when you
She was.
we good?
Um, I
Sorry.
wanted
Yeah.
mention something that I completely remember being like something that really stood out was kids. This was in Mexico, so different, completely different place than where he grew up. But I remember the kids trying to be nasty. I
Mm.
mean, like bad. And not just because I had American parents or, siblings. And I'm saying American because I would always say like I was born here or there, whatever. But they're just kids are going to be nasty sometimes. Not all of them, right? But I remember that being a big thing because my parents sent us to we always went to public schools. And usually the ones we went to were, they weren't the ones where the rich kids were. And so anyway, so I was like a little, light skinned, light haired kid. And I stood out usually compared to everyone else. And they would try to, name calling, all that. But I would, like I said, I would make friends with everyone. So that would cease after, the initial meeting me. They would finally like stop because they would get to know me and then they would quit it. But yeah,
Okay.
rough.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's that's got to be hard. I know that the other panelist that was going to join us today, he's like when he was in high school, he was like 6'2". He's white and blonde and definitely stood out here in Querétaro. And I was kind of hoping he'd share his story too, but we're not able to do that today. It sounds like both of you mainly had local friends in Mexico and in Spain. Is that correct? Or did you have other like foreigner friends?
Yeah, there weren't other Americans in our neighborhood, at least growing up. I mean, we did interact with other missionary families in Madrid and at different events, but daily life in our neighborhood, there was one kid from Switzerland, I think, but it was, yeah, I mean, mostly Spaniards. So yeah.
Okay.
The only Americans we were around that I remember would be the ones that were missionary families as well. Other than that, it was all Mexicans.
Okay. And what's one thing that you enjoyed about being a third culture kid or living in two or more different countries growing up? A good thing about it.
You go.
I mean, I loved it. I really, I mean, was my home, like I love Mexico. The freedom too, that to be able to go all over the place, wherever you want on a bus, whatever, it was easy to get around. So I had a lot of freedom to leave the house and go visit my friends or whatever. In the US, it was like you aren't going anywhere unless there's a vehicle that can take
Yeah.
you. And still it wasn't the same. So I loved it over there. Everything was at a la mano, right there at your fingertips, kind of the corner store, all the dumb stuff, like the little things. The corner store was there. Your friends aren't that far. You can walk over to the market to get whatever you want to go get over there. Go get your school supplies. Everything just seems so easy to get to. So I like that a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, my experience was excellent. Looking back at growing up, there was a few moving years when we got to Spain. We got there in 75, and in 79, my parents bought an apartment, and that's where I was raised. So I was, as a 5-year-old all the way till I left for college, same apartment, didn't move anywhere. And so I got to have a lot of stability. I went to they inaugurated the public school, which was like a block from our house. We could see it from our apartment. That when they opened that school, it was elementary, was first to eighth grade. I went there I was in the first grade class, and I went there all 8 years. So there was a lot of, it was just kind of, it was home. That was just, I mean, there was a stability about my experience that's a little bit different than some that I've heard over the years. I got to hop around a lot. But yeah, I mean, I say often, I wouldn't trade my experience for anything. I mean, I did miss a lot of connecting with my cousins in different places in the US. My closest cousins were in Paris because their parents were missionaries too in Paris. So we had some, every 3 or 4 years, we'd go to Paris or they'd come to Spain, and we'd have that kind of connection. But yeah, overall, it was a happy, good experience. And being bilingual has always been, I've always been so happy about that. And so it's been such a good thing.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I wish I were bilingual from growing up. I think that would make life today a lot easier, but that wasn't really an option in my case. My mom's on this call too, so she's monolingual, just English. Um, yeah, I've talked with a lot of third culture kids, especially where I went to college, we had a lot of kids who were also missionary kids, like the two of you. And in general, when I've talked with them about their experience, they seem for the most part positive experience. I had one classmate in college who she grew up in Colombia, and she had really, I don't know what happened, but she was like, I would never do that to my kids. I would never make them grow up in another country. And it was like, wow,
Yeah.
she was not happy with that. But that's the only person that I've talked to, and talked to a lot of third culture kids. It's the only one that I've talked to that was overall a negative experience. So I'm glad to hear that both of you had, positives in there. I know it wasn't all from all great experiences, I'm sure, but thank you for sharing the positive there. What about something about growing up in a country that's not your passport country that was difficult for you? We've touched a little bit on this, but I don't know if there's something specifically for each of you that's like,
Difficult.
It feels like in retrospect, I notice things more, but at the time, I mean, the times I mentioned where people would try to bully me for being a Yankee, and trying to find that, but nothing. I mean, I think it's typical childhood things. It's not like we were ostracized for being American, or I think there was in general more of in our case, there's more of a fascination, like, oh, we see about America on movies or TV. Now I can talk to you. You've been there. You can tell me some stuff. It was more of a good thing, but that could sometimes be used against us. Um, but yeah, no, in general, I think just the other side of the good coin, of being in another culture and learning and expanding your awareness, and that is the fact that, yeah, there's distance from loved ones, and I think that's the biggest drawback for me from my perspective. Yeah.
okay.
Can you repeat the question? I
If
was
there was,
listening. Sorry.
sorry, if there was something that was difficult growing up for you in Mexico.
Yeah. I can't think of anything. I'm like Matt said, in retrospect, you can't, but really like there's negative things anywhere you go, or there can be. So
Okay. What about when you moved? So both of you moved either teenage years or very young adult years to the US where your parents were from. And we talked a little bit about this already, but what was the most difficult thing about moving to the US for you? So for Jessica, it would have been in high school, and for Matt in college.
I had a culture shock really bad. My parents just put us straight into right into high school. I started 10th grade, and that was like it was scary in a way. It was not anything like the kids' innocence level in Mexico was here, and in the US it was like I don't know. That was really difficult. And yeah, when, in school in Mexico, everybody wore a uniform. That was like a big thing. That was a big culture shock too, with going somewhere. And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, I got to pick my clothes. And, I need to pick something that looks decent or, however I want to come off as. And so that was difficult. Trying to make friends was different because in Mexico, it's people were friendlier, to be honest, than over here. But then it's funny because eventually, when we finally settled in a school that my parents were planning on keeping me in, they started calling me the Canadian, and I had no clue why. And they're like, "Your accent." I'm like, what are you talking about? This is in Texas. We moved to Texas, and yeah, so then that turned into like, okay, well, call me the Canadian, whatever, and that turned into like a positive in a way because then everyone knew me in a positive light, and I made friends that way by telling them I'm not Canadian, or so things worked out, but it was rough. It was rough coming back
Mhm.
Okay. And
or
Matt,
coming.
you? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I meant coming over here was rough to live because I'd never lived here before.
Here being the US.
I'm sorry. Yes, it was very, very hard. And I'm not trying to exaggerate it. It was one of the hardest things in my life that I've ever, been through.
And I think
Yeah,
that a lot of the people who are joining us today may have their kids doing the opposite, coming from the US or Canada and just being popped into Mexican
yeah.
culture. I think everyone here lives or is planning to live in Mexico that's on with us today. And so, that it's good to hear your experience of going from Mexico to the US, because I think it would be a similar experience, just the cultural differences and the language difference, which wasn't as difficult for you because you were bilingual, but just that change in how young people interact with each other and everything is going to be something to navigate with your kids. Yeah. And Matt, what about you?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing Jess talk. I've over the years just seen so many cases like that where missionary kids or third culture kids have had that experience of being transitioned in the middle of very significant years. And like 10th grade, I'm like, oh my, the compassion. Because it's hard. I mean, no matter what country you go to, from your parents' home country to another one, or from where you were back, it's just our difficult years. But even 8-year-olds or whatever. I mean, my first memory is in Spain. I didn't remember a thing my first year of life, right? So my older brother was 2, I was 1, and then 2 younger brothers were born in Madrid, and so we just all had an experience where that was kind of it. And so I would see others come at a mid age, and it was just hard. It was just hard. I mean, I think circumstances and attitudes have a lot to say in how successful that becomes, but it's just hard. It definitely is hard. But in my case, the transition to college, I took I mean, from going to Spanish schools to having that 1 year in English was very helpful for me. But then I also took a whole year off between high school and college, and so I was doing in Madrid, and it was just kind of all getting geared and ready to go. And yeah, by the time I went to college, I was just so ready for it, and the small, I didn't, I really didn't face a lot of rejection. I mean, there was a small little incidents of some people surprised that I didn't know things, but I can live with that. I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, yeah, but I know things you don't know. It's okay. We
That's
just
true.
had different experiences. So, maybe you'll get to this, but even as an adult, I've experienced that in a third way for me because
Mhm.
Mexico is my third country, and so I've had people, but like, some years ago, there was this key phrase once where someone said, Mateo, te falta barrio. Like basically, you need some more hood. And I just, it hit me because I was like, man, part of me longs to be now to fit in and be a Mexican, but I'm certainly not, and it's okay. But then I'm also thinking, yeah, I have some American, some Spanish, and now some Mexican. It's okay. So I think just doing some your own soul work and your own being at peace with your own identity too, is helpful to endure kind of some of those things where you're out of place.
Okay. Can you just mention to us a little bit about your kids' experience in being born in the US and then moving to Mexico when they were younger?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, so my wife is Mexican, so there's also a different dynamic there, where they were born when we were living in Chicago, and then one was 7, and the other one was 4 when we came down to Mexico. Having a Mexican mom, it's like, okay, I'm kind of Mexican, and they'll tell you, oh, I'm Mexican. They look kind of mixed up, but they
They don't stand out here.
yeah, no, they're not blonde, blue eyes, that kind of thing. But yeah, they I think in general they did have an experience where they knew they weren't fully Mexican, and uh, just we didn't have the daily lifestyle and the things we did at home, and how even meals we ate, things like that. So um, they had that awareness. Um, but I don't know. I was thinking yesterday, you know what? I should have asked you if it had been good for one of them to come and just tell you themselves, what their experience is like, or was like. Um, yeah, I don't sense that they had a horrible experience. So
Okay. Well,
we'll
that's
see,
good. We don't want anybody to have a horrible experience.
right?
So I know that third culture kids get asked a lot in all over the world where they're from. What do you say when you're asked that? And how like not to be a psychiatrist or something, but how does it make you feel when someone asks you where you're from? Because I struggle with that. And like clearly I was born and raised in Oregon in the US,
Mhm.
but I've lived in Querétaro, Mexico. In another 3 years, I will have lived here longer than I've lived in Oregon. So
Yeah.
it's like, but I had my growing up years. So if someone wants to know where I grew up, well, that's Oregon.
Mhm.
But with you, that's not even as simple as it is for me, which I don't feel like it's a simple question. So
Right, right. Go, Jess. You ready?
Mine's a little more simple, I think, than your answer.
Okay.
Maybe. So since I was born in Mexico for the longest time, when someone would ask, where you're from, I assumed they meant like where are you like born, where were you initially from, born and raised. So I would always say Mexico. And then now I'm a lot older, I'm getting close to 40, and I've been over here well, now we're moving around, but in the US a longer time. So now I realized, and I'd been thinking about this recently, was that when people ask where you're from, I think they usually mean, where are you coming from? Where do you live? Where is your house? Right? That's what I'm assuming now. So now my answer is a little different. But since we don't even have a home, I'm like, well, we're moving around. We
Wow.
sold a house. We lived, in Texas the last so many years. But yeah, I don't take it as personal, I guess, as I used to take the question. It's easier to answer now that I don't take it so personal. It's a strange thing. I don't know why I would feel it to like that it's such a big deal in the past, why I thought it was that big of a deal. It might be part of the psychology of the whole matter, but that's it for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so too. It transitioned to what motive, where's my mind at the moment the question is asked. And so sometimes I will say Tenancingo, because that's where I live. That's my
Hmm.
hometown. And they'll be like, yeah, but you're not, no, but where are you really from? They're like, and so typically what follows is a deep breath on my part, like, okay. So for me, I was born in the US, I was raised in Spain, and I've lived in different places. Now I'm in Mexico. So it's about, 6 seconds to say it all. But yeah, I can capture the three countries or but yeah, I don't know. It's a funny, I smile at the question often. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I meet third culture kids, I usually try to be sensitive when asking that and like, where are you from? And 'cause like I understand not as much from my own experience, but because of my friendships with many TCKs, I know that it's not just a cut and dry. Like my mom, who's on this webinar too, you ask her where she's from Salem, Oregon. She's lived almost her whole life there, so that's an easy question. But yeah, I think it's something that to prepare third culture kids for though is that they're gonna be asked that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a tough one.
Yeah, and I think there's a part of it where as much as there's been times in my life where I've longed to have more rootedness. I want I think more than half of the world is more rooted than the other half of the world. I think where you pretty much have grown up in the same area and that's where you live. More and more I think it's becoming there's more intermixing, but it's a part of me says, I wonder what that'd have been like, to have just been in one city and this is where my whole life. And I think the opposite is true as well. I think there's just that curiosity. I wonder what it would have been like to have moved or to have gotten around too. So I think you can see it with perspective. Like, people are curious, they want to know. And so just be gracious and tell them. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I now that I'm thinking it as you're speaking, a thought popped into my head. Um, like I said, I lived in Texas for the last, I think it's around 22 years or 23. I'm not even sure. So that, to be honest, like I said, moving there was not the best experience for me. And from the moment I got there, I wanted to leave and I never left. And so I think that maybe had a lot to do with like not wanting to say, I'm from Texas. Not anything against Texas. The culture is great there. The people are great. It was good, but there's something in me that's like, this is not my home. I don't know what it was exactly. And I still feel like we're moving around, we're nomads, and I don't know where to call home yet because I feel like I haven't arrived, if that makes sense.
So you were here in Querétaro, which is one of the places that you lived growing up, and you were here for a few months very recently. Did you feel like a sense of homeness here?
To an extent, I did. And then as an adult living there, it's a little different. You have different responsibilities and the city's not the same as I've gone there regularly since we moved. I go at least once a year, several times a year. So I've gone back a lot. But living there is a little bit different and harder in a sense than like the lifestyle over here. There's
Mhm.
like the cons. There's a lot of positives that I really liked. There were so many things I liked about being in Querétaro recently and living there. But then there's like, if we did this long term, I don't know how much those positives would stay positive. Then I know that sounds very vague, but I
Okay.
don't describe it.
Yeah. And
Uh,
can if it's okay to ask, like, how are your kids adjusting to moving around? I know they're very different in age, but like going from Texas to Mexico to other places in the US, is that something that they've enjoyed, or is that something that they've said, like, this is hard because I don't have specific friends around me, or how has that been?
Well, my 5-year-old is just like in a bliss. Like she's, ignorance is bliss. She's like that right now. She's just happy to be with her family. And my 18-year-old though, on the other hand, he's kind of like, I need to get on my feet so I can get
Okay.
out on my own and be where I want to be.
Yeah.
So he's in that position. But I think, and I know in the long run, this will be a positive experience. Just like that hard experience of me moving at that, to a whole nother country that was just, I was shocked in the long run, that came out to be, there were positives. So my son right now, he's learning to adjust to different beds and just be happy, be content wherever you are, kind of thing. And he's been very good at just adjusting to what's around him. But we've traveled a lot before leaving Texas, before we moved last summer. He was used to traveling. So it wasn't something all of a sudden new out of nowhere. And he had
Okay.
been since he was little. He had been around all the noise, everything. It wasn't a complete shock to him. He was used to that stuff.
Perfect. Do either of you have like any advice or suggestions for people who are planning to move or have already moved to another country with kids or teenagers? Like something that you'd say this might be a good thing to do with your kids, or you might not want to do this.
So I have something to say about I think one of the things that was most successful about me walking away to saying this was a good experience was how much my parents involved us in what they did. Um,
Okay.
because I started noticing a pattern of people or missionary kids who had a bad experience. One of the common things with them was that they're like they would always talk, and my parents went to do this to some country, and I was just kind of there, and I was there because I'm their son or their daughter, but I didn't feel connected in any way. And my parents got us involved in what they did, in the church work and in other outside ministries or whatever they did. So I think staying engaged and the parents' attitude is can do so much. And for sure, there's going to be rebellious, strange years, in the teens and whatnot. But I think if you're already on the way to this is how we do life. This is how it is, and we're engaged. That's certainly a plus. And I can say it from personal experience, and um, I can I've seen it, from other
Yeah.
families as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Is there anything for you, Jess, that you say like this is something that you might want to think about doing or not doing?
Yeesh, I don't know. All I could think about is like if you are moving a child out of where, and I'm saying child, that could even teenagers,
Mhm.
um, let's just be somewhat sensitive to the fact that if you're uprooting them,
Mhm.
that can be very difficult. So maybe like being sensitive to like the child, maybe their reactions may be because they need attention and a little extra love and care, like Matthew was mentioning, spending time with them and making sure that you're not just like dumping them in and expecting them to deal with it all.
Yeah.
I really don't know how you work it out because people are so different. Children, minds are different. So,
Yeah.
I remember being a little bit critical. So as a smart 12-year-old, you know things. And so there was this family that came, and they had two kids, and their oldest was 7, and the other, so I'm early teens and thinking, well, apparently they told the 7-year-old when they left the US to go to Spain, they told him, if you don't like it in Spain, we'll come back, we'll and I'm thinking as a 12-year-old, I'm like, that's such a no, the kid needs to learn that if it, and be part of the family, whatever. Looking at it through my eyes now, I'm thinking, well, I mean, what could they do? And he was already 7, in my case, it was 0, so it's like, it's different. But I mean, to me now, I see that shows sensitivity on their part to say, hey, if this becomes too out of control, we're not going to force you to stay in this circumstance. Although telling a 7-year-old that, I think empowers them too much. I still think there's a little bit of,
Yeah.
oh, that's too much power to give. And I think it resulted in maybe an early departure from the field. So anyway, I think that I think that what I'm trying to bring up is a balance and awareness and engaging with the child about that, but also being careful not to overemphasize their voice in the matter that has implications for the whole family necessarily.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Something that I've seen that can really make or break a child or teenager's time, well, teenager mainly, time in another country is whether or not they know the language and if they know it well.
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of teenagers come here and, they'll go to bilingual school, which if we had kids, we'd send them to bilingual school too if we could pay for it. Um, because, you want to learn in both Spanish and English. But even though their school friends can speak English, they don't want to. And that poses a problem for being able to make friendships and build relationships for kids who, in the case of people moving from the US or Canada to Mexico, the kids don't speak Spanish well. And I think that, and I don't know how to do this because I've never done it. I don't have kids and I was an adult. Well, I was a teenager, but in the US when I learned Spanish. And like I don't know how to get a teenager up to speed on Spanish quickly, but I think that should be a goal that they are able to learn the local language as soon as possible and as well as possible because I know as I have a lot of foreign friends here who they speak Spanish, but talking about deep subjects is really difficult and it's like it's not their heart language and so it's difficult with adults who learn Spanish as adults. You may never get to a level where you feel completely comfortable in your second language. I do feel comfortable in Spanish, but I started learning when I was 14, so it's kind of different. But I think that when you have especially teenagers or older children like 10, 12 years old, that if they never get to that point where they can feel comfortable in their second language, it's going to be really difficult to make local friends. And the good thing about, I think most of you are in Querétaro, that there are a lot of foreign families here where their kids speak English. And I think it's good also to have your kids among other English speakers because maybe that's where their good friendships are going to come from. But I wouldn't ignore the fact that they do live here in Mexico, and unless they're homeschooled, they probably go to school with mainly Spanish speakers. So it should be a priority too. And I know with Jess and Matt, I mean, growing up completely bilingual, that's amazing. So wasn't so much an issue for you, except for maybe, like Jess said, um, going to school in English when you had never gone to school in English before, but at least you spoke the language well. Do either of you have anything else to add?
I was thinking of how important it was to me in even selecting my spouse. I wasn't willing to even consider marrying someone who wasn't bilingual. Like to me, that was such a high part of my identity that I would, if someone knew was starting to learn or knew some Spanish, I'm like, okay, that works. But if it was just someone who only knew English or only knew Spanish, and yeah, I didn't, I don't even, and
Wow.
it's strange because I'm one of 4 brothers, and all 3 of my brothers married American women who don't know Spanish. And inside, I'm like, well, that's great. That's your soulmate, but that doesn't work for me. So that was something important. I just find like going in and out of my worlds. I don't. I want my wife to be able to just do that with me, and not
Mhm.
have to um, not that you would not feel left out of any, part of my story, I guess. Um, yeah, I wanted to add too that in my case, when I grew up in Spain, my mom is from Atlanta, but my dad was a third culture kid too. He was born in Colombia, South America. I know someone on the call is from Colombia.
Mhm.
So my dad was born in northern Colombia. My grandparents were missionaries there in the 40s. And so he got to Spain as an adult with, he was already mixed up, and then we grew up all mixed up. So my son is like, Dad, my mom is Mexican and you're American. Well, you're not American. I don't know what you are, Dad, but then you're not, and then your dad, he's all mixed up. So it's fun. It's fun to have a the mixing going through several generations. Um, I wanted to mention that this year, I turned 50 in August, and this year I'm doing a podcast also where I'm actually telling, it's kind of autobiographical, but what I'm doing is I'm interviewing one person every week, and it's called Uspaxico because it mixes US, Spain, Mexico. Because I've lived 15 years in each of 15 or more years in each of those countries. So I thought that was a unique thing, and wanted to try to celebrate that.
Yeah, if you want to share that with us, if you put it in the chat or send it to me and I'll send it in the
Yeah,
follow-up email.
I'll just put the name of it in the chat, so you can just look at that on YouTube. So,
Okay, great. Yeah. I do want to open it up to if any of the participants have questions that you'd like to ask. You can do that either by voice or without video, or even in the chat if you'd like. I know we have some so one person asks what kind of accent do you have? Because this person has a Colombian accent. And I've heard Matt speak Spanish in kind of a generic Mexicanish accent and also in a definitely Spain
yeah,
Spanish accent.
yeah, I can turn on the Spain if I want, but it's funny because I spend so much of my time talking Mexican Spanish with a Mexican, híjole, órale, all this stuff. So even if I'm using vosotros and la feta and all that with my Spain friends, within a few minutes, to exclaim, oh, ala, instead of saying ala, I'll say, órale, and they'll say, you sound so Mexican, so I can't quite get it, but anyway, I'm not one of those that can do these YouTubes where you flip into all these accents,
Yeah.
those are so fun to see the Argentinian and the Colombian and all that. So, yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have a question? You can either write it in the chat or just turn on your microphone and ask it if you'd like.
Well, Matt, where were your parents or your grandparents missionaries? What city in Colombia?
They were, my dad was born in Monteria, but he was also, they were in Barranquilla and La Neta Rica. My grandpa would actually take a donkey up into the jungle. I mean, he would go in the rivers and then up into the jungles, and he'd play the trumpet and take Bibles, and so it was a lot of rural work. My grandmother was a nurse, so she was kind of like the only doctor for some of these smaller communities. So she would deliver babies and do all kinds of healthcare as needed. So they were there about 30, almost 30 years. Yeah.
Oh, I just
I
returned
just
from Colombia on Wednesday.
Oh, how cool. I've only been to Bogota for 2 hours on a layover. So that's on my bucket list to visit Colombia.
Bogota's the best. Highly recommend. I graduated
Yeah,
high school there, so I'm biased.
nice.
Oh, nice.
So my last Monday, the episode of my podcast was an interview with my dad's sister, who grew up in Colombia. My dad passed away almost 30 years ago, so I would love to interview and know him more. But anyway, so we've talked a little bit about the Columbia years. So
Great. Any other questions? Oh,
I
go
have
ahead.
hey, I don't, oh, let me see where my video is. Not that you need to see me, but, so it's not a question, but just a comment. Something that I really appreciated that you both talked about was the sensitivity towards the child who's being transitioned to another country, because that is something that like not empowering the kid, like you were saying, that 7-year-old, saying, oh, we'll move back if you don't like it. One thing that we've done with our son, he's almost 16, but we moved here when he was 14. And we always just like make sure we have the conversations with him about how he's feeling and how we're feeling, and are we all feeling good about this. So it's not saying we'll just like let you go back, but just checking in a lot is really important for us as a family, and making sure we're all doing well and we're all feeling comfortable, and how are we transitioning. And I mean, and also a big thing that we've done, which I think has helped him a lot with his Spanish, is when we first got here, we found this group, which is it's called Escuadrones. It's it's like a scout thing in the park where they build structures and stuff. And it was right outside of where we were living when we first moved here, and all Mexican boys, all teenage Mexican. It just happened to be every Saturday this thing, and he has been doing it for the past year and a half, and his Spanish, I think, has improved so much because just being immersed in that. I don't think that if he didn't have that, I don't think he'd be as far along as he is, if that makes sense. So that kind of like immersion has been really interesting and I think helpful for him. So I just want to make those comments. I appreciate your feedback on the sensitivity part, because that's definitely something we try to keep in mind for all three of us. So
Yeah. You guys are doing great. It sounds good that you're engaging him. I applaud that.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of echo what you were saying. So I grew up, we're both TCKs, Nikki and this is George. We live in Oaxaca. And thank you so much for sharing. But yeah, my dad, he still worked for USA. He's a foreign service officer. We grew up moving around every 2 to 4 years. And it was never like a question. We're like, okay, we're doing Sri Lanka 2 years, cool. Like, okay, India 4 years, whatever. So the fact that you're talking to your children about it is great. I think once we have kids, we're actually getting married here in a few months. Once we have kids, we'll definitely have that conversation with them to be like, we want to definitely raise our kids as TCKs, but be more aware of the fact that the transitions for us, it was just normal to me until I moved to the US. I never lived in the US until going to university when I was 18, and that was reverse culture shock to the max. And I'm like, I was the foreign friend because I have an American accent, American citizenship, but like never lived there. But yeah, just kind of preparing them like for what is to come. So definitely conversations we want to have with our kids. So appreciate you sharing.
That's great. Anyone else have a question, comment?
Just a comment. One day I realized how at home I feel in airports, because it's transitions, and it's like I walked out of the metro in Mexico City and walked into the terminal. I'm like, I'm at home. Like it was a weird sensation, but it's like, yeah, I think that's maybe a common experience of TCKs. I don't know. Just wanted to mention that because it's the in between spaces of your, and so it's often in your mind you're in an in between space, but now when you get to be in a place that by definition is a transitional place, it's like, yeah, I'm at home here.
I appreciate you saying that, and that actually is a question I have for the both of you. Is how do you feel like as an adult, having had those experiences? Do you feel more like you were more prepared for being an adult and being an international citizen, like as far as traveling, and more comfortable in that sense because of this experience you've had? I don't know if I'm making any sense. Like,
Yeah, hands down for me, yes. I mean,
yeah.
I just traveling and being comfortable in situations where I've never been. I'm just like, okay, like I can figure this out. I can. There's just that problem solving that happens because it's been ingrained as a part of growing up for me.
Yeah, I definitely transition well. And if there's new things that pop up, they don't really scare me. So I'm good. I like traveling, and like Matt was saying, those transitions, it's like, oh, I get to go wait in an airport, or I get to go wait for the bus. I don't know why I'm good with waiting. I'm really good with waiting. But yeah, I adjust well to new surroundings. I can sleep almost anywhere. Even the bed I sleep in, I could sleep on the floor if I had to. I'm very good at adjusting.
Yeah, when you travel a lot, you get to know which airports have which things that you like too.
Yeah.
That's funny about the airports. The Mexico City airport is like, how many times have we been there? So,
Speaking of, have you guys gone to the NLU new airport? Highly recommend. Much nicer. So it's like brand new. They've only opened up a
yeah.
couple like gates, so much
Yeah,
nicer
it would be
experience.
closer for us, but we usually fly out of Querétaro now because we live here in Querétaro. But it seems like a lot of the Felipe Angeles flights go to South America and the Caribbean, and unfortunately, I haven't traveled to South America or the Caribbean recently. But yeah, be interested to go to that airport at some point.
One thing I just thought of that may be somewhat of a culture shock if you're bringing children to a new country like Mexico is because I've had different people that visit us, say similar things or bring up similar things. If you're coming from a nice, I'm saying nice, from a country where you've had all the luxuries, you could say, I guess, or just that sort of thing, they come to Mexico and get it. That was a pretty nice city compared, right? There's a lot of money there. It's like they see potholes and it's scary to them. Like they think, it's like, what is wrong with the infrastructure in this place? And it's like, well, just go around the pothole, right? Just
Yeah.
watch where you're driving. What you can't take your eyes off the road, just that sort of thing seems to shock people how, trash around and get it. That was a clean city, but those sort of things seem to really shock them. Coming to Mexico is just the dirt. I don't know. There's a lot of little things like that. The buildings aren't all beautiful and perfect. The houses look rough sometimes, but that could be anywhere beautiful, right? But
Sorry, I accidentally clicked on your link, and I think I got some audio in there.
Oops.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good thing to mention. Like, if your kids are used to, I mean, even like loading and unloading the dishwasher as one of their chores, well, now well, I guess it could depend, but in general, in my experience, their chores are now going to be actually hand washing the dishes. Or like we had a mom and a daughter come stay with us that they had been to the northern part of Mexico and stayed like in they slept on the floor and used latrines and stuff. And I'm like, you'll be perfectly fine staying at our house. And they totally were. But there were still comments. I think that they still had in their mind that it was going to be more like in the US. And it's like, why is it taking so long to get hot water out of the shower? And I'm like, well, it's just, that's how it is. It wasn't a complaint. And they had clearly lived in difficult or stayed in difficult living conditions. But yeah, just those things that, like we were talking about a little before we actually started the webinar, the sounds in a neighborhood, the different types of trucks that come by that yell out different things or have their little jingles playing, it's like, well, why is the water truck coming by and yelling at 8 o'clock in the morning? Or why does the garbage truck? Oh, my mom knows very well in this room about 11 p.m. 3 times a week, it feels like a garbage truck is going to run over you because it's right out the window.
Yeah.
And it's just things like that, like you're mentioning. I think that's a really good point that things are just different, and to prepare kids that it's different and not necessarily bad.
Yeah.
That was one thing that I learned a lot through. I had college professors that were very international. They had lived in multiple different countries, and they always said, when you go to a different country, it's not bad, it's different. And coming to other countries with that mindset was very helpful for me. It's
Mhm.
like the things that have been difficult in Mexico or in other countries, it's like, okay, well, that's just how things are done here. And if you and your kids can understand and just try to be okay with most of that, it's a change of mindset. My husband always says, change the chip. Like I
Yeah.
guess a phone chip, but yeah, it's just not called that in English, is it? Um, but just like make that change when you get off the airplane or when you cross the border.
Yeah. I put in the chat foreign to familiar. Do you remember that booklet, Jessica?
I
I think.
have that book. Yeah, I
Yeah.
have it in Spanish too, if you ever need it in
Oh,
Spanish. It's
that's so
not a
good.
really great translation, but it's okay.
That it's a small booklet, but it's a good concept. Just trying to delineate how most countries or cultures that they kind of put them in the warm culture or cold culture category. And so just having that awareness is so helpful. For me, Spain is pretty. It's a mix. I mean, there's a blend of warm and cold there. It's not like Northern Europe. I find mixes like this everywhere, but like in Mexico, if you don't start being with a good morning or hey, how are you before you start doing stuff, it's like you're so rude, right? In Spain, I could WhatsApp my Spain friend and say, hey, what day is it? I could just go right into my what I want.
Like in
If
the
I do that
US
here,
too.
yeah, in the US too. If I do that here, it's like, well, good morning, how are you? And oh, right, good morning, how are you? So I'm 50. I've been in here 15 years, and it's still Lena is always reminding me, hey, be nice, sandwich it, at the end, you gotta show some empathy or whatever. So anyway,
Yeah.
I hear Mexicans who go to Spain and they're just shocked by that, and some, that's how it is that now you need to adapt, like others need to adapt when they come to you. There
Mhm.
may be some adapting that you need to do, and I don't know, it's just different ways. Like you say, it's not wrong. It's just different.
Yeah. I've had my sister-in-law has traveled to Europe, Spain and France and England mainly. And she'll say like, "Oh, they do this," and it's almost like they do it wrong. And it's kind of a reminder. I grew up similar to that too, but when I'm in Mexico, I don't do that. And she's like, "Oh yeah, okay." So like when a British person just comes up, like you're saying, and doesn't say good morning, how are you? Or when someone from the US sends her an email, work-related email, and just starts in saying, I need you to do this, this, this,
Yeah.
and this. And she's like, oh, they're mad at me. And it's like, well, it's just a different culture, and it's it can be difficult to navigate that. Through the Querétaro Culture Corner, I actually offer Mexico cultural orientation, sorry, Mexican cultural orientation, where we go over manners, customs, traditions, health and safety issues in Mexico, and how to do things like if you've lived here for a year or something, you probably already know where to go to pay your bills and um, what driving is like and things like that. But it can be an opportunity to dive deeper into the culture and just understand a little bit how things work. And that's, I've been here 18 years, so I have some experience. I definitely wouldn't consider myself an expert. My husband, who's lived in Mexico for 43 years, well, almost, um, he's helped me a lot on that too. And if anyone is interested in that, just let me know. There's a lot of other resources like the Foreign to Familiar book that Matt linked here. I also have a couple of resources specifically dealing with third culture kids that I will put the link to those in a follow-up email that I'll send you later this afternoon, the participants here. If you live in Querétaro and aren't part of, correct me if I'm saying this in the wrong order, Querétaro Expat Kids or Expat Kids Querétaro group, that's a good group to be a part of to be able to interact with your kids, teenagers, with other third culture kids here in town. And I've actually looked for that type of group in other cities, like big cities like Mexico City or Guadalajara, and I haven't been able to find anything like that. So that's a really great resource. I am in the group, even though I don't have kids myself, but I've seen so many get-togethers and like this is for teenagers and this is for the little kids and let's do this. And it's not only things that are in English for expat kids, it's also diving into the culture. And I really appreciate that about that group that they said, hey, at the Gomez Morin, which is a cultural center, they're having this, and it's going to be in Spanish, but let's go. So that's really neat too, if you want to check that out. I'll also link that in the follow-up email. Matt has shared with us his Uspaxico YouTube channel, which I will also link. I don't know if Jess, if you have anything that you'd like to share with us, something that you're involved in. I didn't really ask you this before, which I should have. If not, that's okay. But yeah.
I did nothing, but I will give you, I wanted to point out when we were in Querétaro, I don't know how many months ago it was that it happened, but our vehicle got towed and Jess,
A rental
Jess
vehicle.
rental vehicle, it was a wreck. It was a mess. And Jessica and her husband got me out of it. Jessica did a ton of work. Yeah, they helped me get that all settled within days, which I don't know how long that would have taken. God knows how long.
I felt like it took way too long, but
Fine.
it got done. It got done, and it turned out well. They didn't charge even for the extra days, did they?
No, they didn't.
Yeah,
So
because it was impounded, the rental
Wow.
vehicle.
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, don't park in front of people's garages, people.
Yeah, wait, I shouldn't say unless, just don't do it. But I would do it again.
I know you would.
Se ponchan llantas gratis means something, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We pop
Yeah.
tires for free. There are signs that say that in front of
Yeah.
people's carport doors. Well, it's getting close to ending time here. So I just want to thank everyone who has joined us this morning. This will be up on the Querétaro Culture Corner YouTube channel at some point in the next week. Um, and also I'll post it on my Facebook page. So if you want to share that with anyone who wasn't able to make it.